Tribune newspaper tomorrow.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning to you and your hosts, and Merry Christmas, which I heard you talking about.
Sir, first question is, what is your stand on the proposed sovereign wealth fund to be called the Maharlika Wealth Fund that's being pushed by by several legislators from Congress?
So, first of all, just so you know, the UK doesn't have a wealth fund, so actually it's obviously also new territory. We don't have that. In Europe, it's only France and Norway. Regarding the fund itself, I think it requires, I'm open-minded. I think it requires a lot of study. I would echo the comment made by my very good friend George Barcelona, the president of the Philippine Chambers, which requires a lot of study and planning. Obviously, I'd say the aim to invest in infrastructure is what the country needs, and if that's the vehicle, we should be looking at it. The question is also timing, because obviously this fund will invest in various areas, and obviously, as you're probably aware, this is a very difficult time in terms of overall investing. The last year, obviously because of the Ukraine-Russian conflict, that's had a very significant impact on markets. So, in summary, I'm open-minded. I think the need to invest in key projects such as infrastructure is certainly required, renewable energy, green projects, whether it's through this fund, but it does require significant study, and timing is also key for these funds.
So the biggest critics of this proposed fund, their biggest contention is the source of funding. But I understand that, so depending on the country, sovereign wealth funds are sourced either through, of course, through the share of the government from their resource, the exploitation of their resources. Now my question is, one, can the government create a sovereign wealth fund and get the funding from pension funds? Second is, what do you think is the best solution for the government to get funding for this proposed sovereign wealth fund or Maharlika Wealth Fund?
Well, I think first of all, they've already announced amendments, correct, to this, that they're not actually going to take contributions from the pension side. I think the most recent announcement said it would now be contributions from Banco Central, from Land Bank and the Development Bank. I think again you've got to look at what is the proposed issue here, in the sense of what are they trying to achieve. Now, obviously, what we're looking at, and that's what the economic managers have been explaining, is long-term development and investment. And the question, of course, is, can the Philippines fund this in this way, and the overall projects. Now, you can argue there are other solutions to this opportunity, a development fund, etc. Now, as I said, I think the key we've got to look at actually is what are the overall aims. The aims is to develop infrastructure projects which will accelerate growth and therefore provide more prosperity and overall wealth to the country. The overall aim is good. The question is how to achieve that. Now, as I said already, they've said that's not going to come now from the pension funds, but rather from, if I wrote, that's just in the recent amendments to the bill. And I think they've also amended who will be heading this fund. I think it's now supposed to be, I believe, the Secretary of Finance. So I think, to answer your point, the real key here is, one, I fully endorse the need to invest further in infrastructure and digitalization. The question is, how can the funding be done, and what's the most effective way to do it?
Mr.
Okay.
Sure, please go ahead.
Yeah, from the business perspective, how can the Philippine government ensure that the funds are being, properly allocated and used accordingly? What are the safety nets that you think must be put into place to assure that the Filipino people will not be a repeat of the mistakes of the past governments?
Well, sure, and I'm sure you're referring, of course, to the Malaysian fund, which was obviously one of the key issues. And I believe that's been clearly highlighted. I think the Malaysian fund had one signatory, if I understood correctly. Here there'll be numerous checks and balances. I think that can be assured. I think the other thing I would link this to, because obviously I represent the British Chamber, what we're always interested in is trying to attract foreign direct investment.
Okay.
And that would also help to boost. So the question is, what is the route to get there? I strongly believe, let me be very clear, I've been in the Philippines now almost 20 years. I strongly believe in the country. I believe you have a good opportunity. And I do believe that along with the human capital, the human wealth that you have in terms of the talent here, the key is to accelerate that growth through infrastructure spending, which has been identified. So to answer your point, I do think there are checks and balances that can be put in place, and I think the learning of that specific case, which is from Malaysia, is well understood. I come back to the point of what we're trying to achieve here, and I think also, will this fund, or can other measures be done to further accelerate foreign direct investment, which can also be used, of course, to boost infrastructure spending, which is highlighted as, I believe, the key aspect of this fund.
Okay, Mr. Nelson, good morning and welcome again to Gising. This is Chin.
Yeah, good morning. Very nice to be here. I like your painting, by the way, guys. It's very nice.
Thank you. Well, earlier you mentioned about you are open-minded, but you believe that that timing should be considered. You also mentioned about what's the goings on between Ukraine and Russia. And you also
Correct.
stated that significant study is a primary factor to be considered, to be done. Considering that, say for example, that the Philippine government study thoroughly the proposed fund, although I can feel and I can sense that you would like to advise to have the proponents study it further. But just in case, do you believe that the creation of this MWF or Maharlika Wealth Fund can increase national wealth and resources to foster economic growth and development of the country?
Yeah, I mean, let's put it this way. If you look at other sovereign wealth funds, they have achieved that. Now, you can talk about how they've been set up. I mean, the most prominent examples of sovereign wealth funds are Norway in Europe. Of course, that's funded through its oil reserves. I think in Asia, what's well known is Switzerland. Sorry, I beg pardon, Singapore. And Singapore has created that because obviously it's got a lot of export revenue, right? Now, the question is, and I'll come back to those points, is do I think a sovereign fund can help in terms of infrastructure? Yes. Why did I talk about timing? Well, if you look at the remit and that depends on the remit of the fund, obviously the Singapore Sovereign Fund, like all funds, will have invested across the world. And as you're probably, the reason I mentioned that conflict is this has been a very turbulent time for stock markets. I mean, the NASDAQ, which is the US technology index, one of the main indexes, is off 30% this year. That's why timing is very critical. But to come back on and answer this point, can a sovereign wealth fund assist infrastructure? Yes. But it also depends on the remit. Why timing? Well, timing, if you're going to invest in other investments to create a bigger return and create more wealth, timing in particular is critical because unfortunately this year, because of that conflict which started in February, markets have been very unstable overall. That's not just a factor for the Philippines, that's a factor worldwide.
Regarding, Sir Nelson, regarding timing, because regardless of the sources of these funds, these funds, say from the dividends of the BSP or even from pension or whatever, these funds cannot stay idle. Conflict or not, these funds has to be invested somewhere. So I think the question should be, where do we invest safely?
Yeah, well, okay, so first of all, as you're probably aware, there are safer investments.
Yes.
You could argue there is nothing completely safe.
Yes.
What I would say though is this, the way of doing this is, will that sovereign fund, and that's the potential here, is that the Philippines definitely needs to do further investment in infrastructure, in energy, for example.
Yes.
You know, the Philippines has a very high cost of energy, which is one of the factors. Also, if you take digitalization, okay, we're speaking today on Zoom, and it's coming across clear, I hope. But as we all know, we need to do further more work in terms of digitalization for the Philippine economy. So if the funding can increase investments there, you will get the returns, okay? Why do I say that? Because the potential for the Philippines, let's go back pre-pandemic, the Philippine economy was growing at about 6.5%, 7%. And that can probably be accelerated even further if you have the right infrastructure projects. So the question is, are we going to be using that fund to invest in the Philippines, which I think is one of the remits? And the reason we say timing, and to answer your point, I hope I got that right, if you invest in other areas to create a greater return, there is always going to be risk. I mean, in any investment, they say the greater the return, the greater the risk. However, saying that, I do believe infrastructure projects in the Philippines are going to give you a good return and ultimately will increase the overall GDP and wealth of the country, which is what we're all looking for.
Okay, that's a good explanation.
Yeah.
Very good.
So, sir, do you have any parting words for our viewers, or any advice to our government regarding the creation of the World Fund?
First of all, thank you very much. I think you've got a much better looking. You've been looking at the ceiling of my apartment here in BGC, which is not as good as your very good painting of the three of you. So I first of all like to say thank you very much for the kind questions. I do think that we should be open-minded about this. I understand the concerns, and I think the question about obviously checks and balances is very valid, and obviously the lesson learned from Malaysia. And I think obviously the other question, and I think that's been trying to be answered by the economic managers, and I think there'll be further discussions about that, is what is the remit and can it further boost the economy? The final thing I'd say is that I believe there are a lot of opportunities in the Philippine economy. I think with the right investment, and as we're trying to do with the British Chamber, we've been trying to increase UK companies to further invest here, and I think there's great opportunities. So open-minded, a lot more planning and thinking, but the way forward is to invest in infrastructure. And thank you for your time.